A cold bottle of milk poured down dozens, burst into laughter like fireworks. But Alyssa didn't flinch, didn't cry. Like the video, subscribe to the channel because what happened next made the entire room rise to their feet. The worn piano echoed faintly across the empty music room. Alyssa sat in her familiar wheelchair, thin hands gripping the microphone, her voice rising clear, steady, filled with a quiet strength. But she didn't get to finish her song. A giggle broke out from the corner of the room. Then came a flood of whispers like needles pricking into each fragile note. Alyssa tried to release, "Oh my God, who let the cripple sing? Maybe she's just performing for her wheels." Laughter exploded, spilling across the room like a broken dam. Alyssa froze. She clutched the mic tighter, forcing back the sting in her eyes. Her lips trembled, but she kept singing, clinging to each beat like a raft against the rising flood. A piece of chalk flew across the room and hit the bottom of her wheelchair with a sharp crack. Alyssa flinched. She looked up and caught Madison's eyes. The head cheerleader stood with her two loyal friends, doubled over with laughter. "Why don't you audition for the Voice Wheelchair Edition?" Madison shouted, sending the whole group into a fresh fit of hysterics. At the back of the room, Mr. Crawford, the music teacher, just smirked and shrugged. No words of warning. No glance of protection. Alyssa's fingers squeezed the microphone so hard her knuckles turned white. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the air. But she knew if she broke now, they would win. She drew in a long breath, closed her eyes, and kept singing. Her voice, though shaky, climbed a trembling kite battling a cruel wind. When the song ended, Alyssa bowed her head, picked up her fallen music sheets, and wheeled herself quietly out of the room. Behind her, the laughter still rang out, blunt and jagged, like a dull blade scraping raw skin. The school hallway stretched out endlessly. Each push of her wheels felt like she was dragging herself against the entire world. But she didn't stop. Not today, not ever. The first time Alyssa was bullied was right in the school cafeteria. She was trying to push her lunch tray, balanced on her lap, toward an empty table when someone suddenly blocked her path. It was Jason, one of the star football players. Tall, broad, always surrounded by his crew. "Hey, watch out. Don't let your wheels crush my Gucci shoes," he said loudly, making sure the entire cafeteria could hear. Laughter erupted from nearby tables. Alyssa bit her lip, gripping the sides of her wheelchair tightly. She quietly tried to edge past, but Jason wasn't done. He pretended to trip over her chair, stumbling dramatically before knocking her tray to the floor. "Oh no!" "Clumsy too, huh?" he yelled, feigning confusion. Food splattered everywhere. The cafeteria roared with laughter. Alyssa bent down to pick up scattered fries, her hands trembling from humiliation. No one helped, no one intervened. The hall monitor nearby merely shook his head and turned away as if it was none of his business. The second time happened out in the schoolyard under the sweltering midday sun. Alyssa was reading beneath a tree when Madison and a group of cheerleaders strutted over. In Madison's hand was a bottle of soda. "Hey, wheelchair singer, heard you're trying out for the talent show. Let me help you warm up." Madison laughed and without waiting for a response, popped the bottle open, spraying soda high into the air. Dark, sticky droplets rained down onto Alyssa's hair and clothes. The book on her lap soaked through instantly, pages sticking together in damp clumps. Shrieking laughter filled the schoolyard. A group of boys filmed the scene on their phones, jeering and flipping her off. Alyssa didn't cry. She refused to let herself break down in front of them. She simply closed her ruined book, wiped the soda from her cheek with her sleeve, and wheeled herself away from the crowd. Every inch of ground felt endless. Every push of her wheels was a small battle. The wounds Alyssa carried weren't visible. Not bruises on her skin, but silent fractures inside her self-respect. Inside the fragile dreams she had clung to since childhood. Still, Alyssa kept going. Somehow, through sheer patience and quiet defiance, she refused to let them steal her voice. Alyssa's apartment sat tucked away in a crumbling old building on the outskirts of the city. The stairways creaked under every step. The walls were blotched with damp stains, and the hallways always carried a faint musty smell. Her room was just big enough for a single bed, a battered desk, and the familiar wheelchair neatly parked in the corner. Alyssa's mother worked 2 jobs prep, cook at a restaurant by day and laundry helper by night. The meager wages were barely enough to keep simple meals on the table and the lights on. Each month, her father had left when Alyssa was still very small, abandoning them to wrestle with a life that showed no mercy. Inside that tiny room, Alyssa nurtured a dream. She never dared speak aloud to the outside world to become a singer. From a young age, she had fallen in love with music. She listened to everything from Whitney Houston's aching ballads to Beyoncé's bold anthems, to the soaring hymns at the small church her mother took her to every Sunday. The toy microphone her mother had given her for her 8th birthday still sat on the bookshelf, chipped, faded, but treasure. Many evenings, Alyssa would sit by the window looking out over the empty, weedy courtyard, close her eyes and sing softly to herself. In those moments, the harsh world outside the pitying stares, the cruel laughter ceased to exist. Every night after her mother collapsed into exhausted sleep, Alyssa would slip on her headphones, turn the music low, and practice. She would record her voice, listen back, adjusting each note, every breath, each delicate pause. No one taught her. No one showed her how. But somewhere deep inside, that she knew this voice was the only place where she was truly free. Her dream was fragile and small, just like her slender frame. Yet it was the one thing that kept her standing against the cold stares and cutting words that met her every day at school. In that cramped, aging, and merciless world, Alyssa kept her dream alive, quietly, stubbornly, like a tiny flame that refused to die. One week after the soda incident on the schoolyard, Alyssa once again became the class entertainment, this time in biology. As she struggled to push her wheelchair into the room, Madison's group had already set up a trap, a slick trail of liquid soap smeared right across the floor in front of Alyssa's desk. Unaware, Alyssa kept moving forward. The front wheels hit the soap, skidded violently, and the chair lurched sideways. Alyssa gripped the armrest tightly, trying to keep her balance, but the slip came too fast. She crashed into a nearby desk, nearly falling out of her chair. A ripple of laughter rose up, then erupted into loud, merciless howls. Madison whipped out her phone, holding it high as she shouted deliberately, "Oh my God, action movie, wheelchair edition." Epic! Others clapped and howled with laughter. And the biology teacher? He simply shook his head lightly and climbed up to the lectern, opening his textbook as if nothing had happened. Alyssa bit her lip, quietly pulled her chair back into place, wiped the soap off her sleeves, and sat at her desk without a word. Her heart hammered, not from fear of falling, but from the flood of humiliation crashing through her like breaking waves. But it didn't end there. The very next day during music practice, Alyssa found herself the target of yet another cruel prank. As she approached the microphone to rehearse, she realized it had been adjusted far too high for her to reach. Worse still, someone had zip-tied the rear wheels of her chair. Locking it in place, she tried twisting, stretching, lifting herself up, but her body remained trapped, wobbling helplessly toward the unreachable microphone. A roar of laughter filled the room. "Come on, no legs, pop star," a shrill voice cried immediately, triggering more jeers and whistles. Several students lifted their phones, eager to capture the funny spectacle. The room once meant for quiet practice turned into a brutal circus stage. Alyssa gripped the arms of her chair until her knuckles turned white, biting her lip until it bled before yanking herself free and wheeling out of the classroom before the tears could fall. No teacher spoke. No one ordered them to stop. No apologies, no consequences. Alyssa glided down the endless hallway, carrying not only the slick stains of soap and tear tracks on her clothes, but deeper invisible scars carved into her dignity. Inside, her anger and humiliation swelled like a balloon stretched to its limit, one touch away from bursting. Friday afternoon, just before the school's rehearsal for the upcoming event, Alyssa once again became a target. At that time, the music room was almost empty, with only a few students setting up equipment. Alyssa wheeled herself in, holding her carefully folded sheet music close. She was intently reviewing the melody, when behind her, Madison's group was already huddling and whispering, "Ready." Madison nudged Jason, handing him a water bottle disguised as a sports drink, filled with a nasty mix of salad dressing and dish soap. As Alyssa approached the microphone, Jason strolled over, pretending to fumble, and splashed the bottle's contents right in front of her wheelchair. A sharp, acrid smell filled the room. Before Alyssa could react, her front wheels rolled into the slick mess, making an awful screeching sound. The whole group burst out laughing. Madison rushed over, feigning concern. "Oh no, sorry, didn't see you there." Then she turned away, winking triumphantly at her friends. At Alyssa's feet, the dirty liquid spread, soaking into her pant cuffs and the wheels of her chair. She looked up and met a sea of expectant stares, all waiting for her to falter, to break down in tears, but Alyssa gave them nothing. Calmly, she rolled backward, pulled out a tissue, and wiped the wheels clean, moving as if the whole incident were no more than a minor inconvenience. That quiet resilience only fueled the crowd's frustration. They wanted her to crumble. They wanted to shatter the fragile hope she still carried inside. Not enough, they whispered among themselves. They needed something harsher, something brutal enough to crush her spirit beyond repair. And it was from that moment that a crueler plan began to take shape. A plan set for the final rehearsal right in front of the entire school and staff. A plan not just to humiliate Alyssa, but to obliterate the one dream she had fought to protect all these years. The final rehearsal took place on Tuesday afternoon in the school's large auditorium. On stage, groups of students took turns performing, preparing for the upcoming important event. Alyssa sat in the very last row, clutching her music folder tightly to her chest, waiting for her turn. All around her, whispers floated in the air. Glances thrown her way, a few eye rolls. Snickers rising every time her wheelchair moved even slightly. Turner, the music teacher, approached with the participant list in hand. When her eyes skimmed past Alyssa's name, she frowned and sighed loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "Ah, our little wheelchair singer," Miss Turner said, half mocking, half joking. Laughter erupted from the students standing nearby. Alyssa dropped her gaze to her music folder, her fingers clutching the edges of the paper so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her chest tightened, but she said nothing. "Actually," Miss Turner continued in that same half-mocking tone, "you don't have to sing if it's too inconvenient for you." The snickering spread like a stain blooming across the room. Alyssa lifted her head, her eyes flashing with quiet defiance. "I will sing." She said, her voice steady in a way that startled even herself. Miss Turner shrugged, scribbled something onto her clipboard and turned away, leaving Alyssa alone with the weight of 100 stares pressing down on her. When Alyssa rolled herself onto the stage, a group of students down front whistled mockingly. Someone shouted, "Let's see if the wheels dance with the beat." The entire auditorium roared with laughter. The teachers who should have intervened only offered awkward smiles or looked the other way. Alyssa gripped the microphone tighter. Her hands shook slightly, but her gaze was unwavering. She inhaled, ready to sing, knowing full well that the entire room was waiting for her to falter, to collapse, but Alyssa knew. If she gave up today, she would be imprisoned forever by their sneers. She would sing, even if her voice trembled, even if her heart broke. She would sing. The backing music began to play, signaling Alyssa's turn to perform. She closed her eyes for a brief second to steady herself, then began to sing. Alyssa's voice, though trembling, at first rose clear and bright, stretching into the auditorium and pulling an unexpected hush from the crowd. But the silence did not last. As Alyssa moved into the soaring part of her song, someone in the audience suddenly quacked like a duck, loud and sharp. The hall erupted in laughter. A plastic water bottle rolled across the stage with a hollow clatter. Alyssa faltered for a single breath. Her hand tightened around the microphone until her knuckles turned white. Miss Turner, who should have intervened, merely crossed her arms and watched from afar, her lips pressed into a thin line as if suppressing a smirk. Swallowing her tears, Alyssa pressed on, forcing each word through a throat raw with humiliation. She finished her song amid scattered mocking applause and hushed snickers. When the music cut off, Alyssa wheeled herself off stage without waiting for any applause or encouragement. She rolled past cold stares and smirking faces, her chest aching with every push of her wheels. That night, Alyssa sat alone by the window in her tiny apartment. Outside, the city sparkled under countless lights. But inside her chest, there was only a cold, heavy gray. She opened her old music notebook, the one filled with lyrics. She had written songs she had dreamed of singing, but tonight, staring at the faded ink, she felt nothing but emptiness. Maybe she thought her voice wasn't good enough. Maybe the laughter had been right all along. Maybe dreams like hers were a luxury for someone else, someone stronger, someone whole. Her hand trembled as she closed the notebook. Half of her wanted to shut it forever, to give up dreaming, give up singing, but somewhere deep inside, a fragile light still flickered, worn thin, but not completely extinguished. Even if the whole world turned its back, Alyssa knew if she could find just one real reason, if one person could truly see her, she would sing again. But for now, her dream sat beneath a heavy layer of darkness. The final rehearsal day arrived. The entire school gathered in the grand auditorium. Teachers, students, event organizers all present a tense atmosphere, hanging heavy over the room. Alyssa sat in the row reserved for performers, clutching her songbook tightly, her heart pounding against her ribs. When her turn came, she wheeled herself onto the stage into the harsh spotlight. The intro music began to play. Alyssa closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and started to sing. In that moment, everything else faded, the crowd, the noise, the fear, leaving only her and her voice. But behind the curtain, Jason and Madison were ready. Jason gripped a large carton of milk already uncapped. As Alyssa held a high note, Jason stepped onto the stage, smirking, and upended the carton over her head. The cold white liquid poured down, soaking Alyssa's hair. face and clothes. It seeped into her sleeves, dripped down her back, and puddled into the crevices of her wheelchair. The auditorium froze for a heartbeat and then erupted in wild laughter. Phones shot up like a field of flashing lights recording the cruelty. Madison stood at the side, howling with laughter. Jason raised the empty carton, high in triumph, as if he had achieved something monumental. Alyssa sat frozen at center stage, her entire body trembling. The microphone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor with a sharp metallic crack. She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting back the tears burning at the edges of her vision. Ms. Turner and the other teachers seated in the front row just stared. No one moved, no one intervened. No reprimand, no outstretched hand, not even a flicker of sympathy. Alyssa felt as if the world had caved in around her. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into thin air. But under the icy milk soaking her skin, under the cruel howling laughter, something inside her didn't break. It burned. Not tears' fire, a fire stronger and fiercer than anything she had ever known. She gripped the armrests of her wheelchair, lifted her chin, and looked straight into the crowd, her eyes shining with a strange, fierce clarity. No more hiding, no more shrinking away. If she was going to fall, she'd climb from the deepest depths herself, and as Alyssa wheeled off the stage, leaving behind the brittle laughter and blinding flashes, she knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. 3 days after the disastrous incident on stage, a special announcement swept across the school. The campus would soon welcome a guest of honor, Harmony Wells, a nationally renowned Black singer, a multiple Grammy Award winner, and a living symbol of perseverance through adversity. She would perform at the upcoming annual event and hold a special meet and greet with the students. The news electrified the entire school. Students rushed into rehearsals, teachers scrambled to reorganize schedules, and decorations went up hastily, banners, balloons, streamers. The atmosphere turned feverish, as if simply being near Harmony Wells might somehow redeem everyone's better selves. Meanwhile, Alyssa sat quietly in the dim corner of the library, flipping through the yellowed pages of a worn-out book. The humiliation from a few days ago still clung to her skin like a fresh wound, unhealed and raw. Every time she wheeled down a hallway, every whispered giggle that trailed in her wake served as a brutal reminder of the public shame she had endured. She had no intention of attending the event, no desire to cram herself into the crowd of cheerful faces, the same faces that had once laughed at her tears. All Alyssa wanted was to finish the final days of school in silence, to disappear from this place for good. But fate had its own peculiar designs. During the dress rehearsal, Harmony Wells made an unexpected request. She wished to wander the school freely, to get a real feel for student life, she said. The administration hesitated, but couldn't refuse. And so, when Harmony gently pushed open the door of the library, her eyes immediately fell upon a small Black girl in a wheelchair, scribbling lyrics into a battered notebook with trembling hands. Harmony stood still for a few moments. Something about that image tugged sharply at her heart, the solitude, the invisible bruises, and that fragile but undeniable flame of resilience shining through. A flame she recognized all too well. Without hesitation, Harmony crossed the room, moving quietly, and offered Alyssa the warmest, most genuine smile. In that instant, the wheel of destiny shifted softly, irrevocably. Harmony Wells didn't rush to start a conversation. She simply sat down across from Alyssa, resting her chin on her hand, studying the girl with a thoughtful gaze. Alyssa looked up, startled to see a stranger sitting so close, but she didn't recognize who it was right away. Their eyes met for a fleeting, awkward moment. Alyssa quickly lowered her gaze, pretending to focus intently on her notebook, a strange nervousness rising in her chest. Harmony glanced at the pages spread out before Alyssa hastily scribbled. Lyrics, simple yet earnest chord notations. A flicker of curiosity and something deeper, almost tender, stirred inside the singer. She asked softly, "Are you writing music?" Alyssa hesitated. In that instant, she weighed whether to answer truthfully. Finally, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, she replied, "I'm just practicing singing." Harmony smiled warmly. "Would you sing a little for me?" she encouraged. Alyssa glanced around the empty library, her heart pounding against her ribs. Part of her wanted to shake her head and hide. But there was something so genuine, so disarming in Harmony's gaze. No judgment, no pity. Alyssa swallowed hard, drew a shaky breath, and began to sing. The moment her voice floated into the air, Harmony froze. It wasn't a perfect voice, nor was it professionally trained. But it carried something raw and undeniable, pain, hope, and a fragile beauty no polish could replicate. Each note struck a quiet chord deep within, reaching into the hidden corners of the heart, Harmony closed her eyes and listened motionless. When Alyssa finished, the silence that followed was thick, saturated with emotion. The singer opened her eyes slowly and looked straight at Alyssa, her expression filled with astonishment and awe. "You have a gift," Harmony whispered, as if afraid to break the fragile magic hanging between them. "Don't let anyone take that voice from you. Do you understand?" Alyssa could only stare back wide-eyed. For the first time in her life, someone was looking at her. Not with pity, not with ridicule, but with true recognition. Somewhere deep inside, buried under layers of pain and humiliation, a tiny spark that had almost gone out stirred to life again. Harmony Wells stayed silent for a long moment after Alyssa finished singing. She studied the girl intently, her eyes thoughtful as if weighing something deeply important. Finally, Harmony set her hand gently on the table, leaned forward, and lowered her voice. "Alyssa, I have an invitation for you." Alyssa's eyes widened, disbelief flickering across her face. Harmony smiled encouragingly. "Your school's hosting a big event soon, right? I'll be performing a special song. And I want you to sing it with me on a stage." Alyssa froze. She stared at Harmony, then down at her own trembling hands clutching the notebook. I can't," she stammered. "I'm just a nobody." Harmony reached out, placing a gentle finger on Alyssa's hand, cutting off the words, spilling from her lips. "No," she said firmly. "You're someone whose voice the world needs to hear. Not because you're perfect, but because you're real." A lump rose in Alyssa's throat, not from the familiar ache of hurt, but from something new. Belief. Someone truly believed in her. Someone saw her. Not the wheelchair, not the disability, not the cruel jokes, but her. "But they'll laugh at me," Alyssa whispered, voice barely more than a breath. Harmony squeezed her hand gently, her gaze steady. "If they laugh, let them laugh. You'll sing louder than their laughter. Sing for yourself. Sing for every kid out there who's still looking for a reason to keep dreaming." Alyssa fell silent for a long while. Inside her, the walls built from fear. Doubt and shame slowly began to crack piece by piece. Finally, she gave a small nod, trembling but full of quiet resolve. Harmony smiled, a smile as warm and steady as sunlight after a storm. She rose to her feet and said softly, "Get ready, little one. We're going to make the whole world listen." In that moment, Alyssa felt as if invisible wings were unfolding behind her. The wounds were still there. The pain hadn't vanished, but for the first time, she could see a path that led somewhere other than darkness. A path leading straight into the light. The day of the main event arrived, and the auditorium was packed to the brim. Banners, lights, and an excited buzz filled the air like a tangible mist. Everyone eagerly awaited Harmony Wells' performance. No one expected that the moment they would never forget would begin with the image of a small girl quietly rolling her wheelchair onto the stage under a warm golden spotlight. Alyssa clutched the microphone tightly. Her heart pounded wildly, but her eyes shone with fierce determination. Beside her, Harmony Wells placed a steady hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Sing as if it's the last time you'll ever get to." The music started. The entire hall froze. And then Alyssa began to sing. Her voice rose at first shaky, then stronger with each note like a small stream, finding its way into a flowing river. A voice not just beautiful but powerful. The power of a soul that had been crushed and yet stood back up. Harmony joined in at the chorus, but she sang softly, stepping back to let Alyssa shine. The whole auditorium seemed to hold its breath. Faces that once mocked her now stared wide-eyed. Eyes that once dismissed her now watched transfixed. Even the teachers exchanged awkward glances, struggling to process what they were witnessing. When the song ended, a heavy silence blanketed the room for a heartbeat. Then from a corner of the hall, a single round of applause broke out. Then another. The applause spread like wildfire through dry grass. The entire auditorium rose to their feet, clapping thunderously. No more ridicule, no more mocking laughter. From the stage, Alyssa looked down and saw Madison frozen in place. Jason turning his face away, and the teachers clapping, clumsy and desperate to redeem themselves. Harmony grasped Alyssa's hand and raised it high, under the blinding stage lights before hundreds of stunned faces. The girl in the wheelchair shone like a star. That day, Alyssa didn't just sing. She reclaimed herself. After the day Alyssa shone on stage, the atmosphere at school changed noticeably. There were no more mocking stares as she wheeled down the hallway. Instead, there were furtive glances mixed with curiosity and admiration. Some students who had once been indifferent or even complicit in the bullying began nodding greetings to her. A girl from the choir who had never spoken to Alyssa before hesitantly invited her to join a practice session. Another group shyly left a small card on her desk, hastily scrawled with a message. "Your voice is amazing, never give up." Even the teachers altered their behavior. Mrs. Turner, who had once made snide remarks, now acted more attentive in music class, even going so far as to ask Alyssa about her next rehearsal plans. Whether this shift came from genuine remorse or pressure, Alyssa didn't particularly care. What mattered was this: she was no longer invisible. Still, Alyssa remained quiet. She didn't rush to make friends, nor did she bask in belated compliments. She understood that fleeting admiration could not erase years of being trampled. But at least now she had proven the most important truth. Real worth doesn't come from the way others look at you. It comes from who you are inside. And with each passing day, Alyssa moved more firmly along the path she had forged for herself. Even though most students and teachers had changed their attitude, not everyone accepted Alyssa. In the dim corners of the hallways, whispers still persisted. Madison and Jason and their close-knit group had never truly admitted their bitter defeat. Outwardly, they stayed silent around Alyssa, but behind her back, their hostility simmered. "It was just luck," Madison muttered, whenever someone mentioned Alyssa's performance. Without Harmony Wells backing her up, she'd still be a useless cripple. Words like that spread quietly, filthy as oil stains seeping across the floor. Jason even created an anonymous social media account to post mocking comments about Alyssa, calling her a singing doll and making fun of her wheelchair. A few timid students joined in, leaving laughing emojis under the cruel posts in class. Madison and her friends no longer dared to openly mock Alyssa, but the sidelong glances, the half smirks, the whispered comments still stabbed at her like tiny needles. Once during music class, when Alyssa volunteered to sing a new piece, Madison muttered loudly enough for nearby students to hear. Probably Harmony whispered the lyrics into her ear. A few chuckles rose from the back of the room, but this time no one laughed as hard as before. Some students just turned and gave Madison a cold, blank look before facing forward again. Alyssa heard it all. She felt the undercurrent of resistance, sharp, petty little thorns beneath her every step. But she didn't react. She had learned reacting to smallness only feeds it. Instead, Alyssa focused on her own work. She practiced harder, honing her breath, control her vocal technique, her stage presence. She recorded each practice session, listened carefully, and took notes on every spot that needed improvement. Every note she sang, every song she finished, was another stitch in the quiet mending of her old wounds. Inside her, a new kind of strength was forming, the strength of persistence. She knew not everyone would change. There would always be people who hated her just because her existence made them uncomfortable. But Alyssa also knew she didn't have to win them all. She just had to keep moving forward on her wheels, with her voice, with her will. And with every passing day, while her haters stayed rooted in the shadows of their own bitterness, Alyssa kept moving slowly, steadily toward the light waiting for her. Alyssa knew a successful performance didn't turn her into a star overnight. The world beyond was still brimming with challenges, and deep down, she understood to stand firm. She had to grow stronger every single day, so she threw herself into relentless practice. Every morning before the school hallways buzzed with students, Alyssa wheeled herself into the music room. She warmed up her voice alone, working through the simplest exercises up to soaring high notes that demanded full control. She patiently corrected every breathy whisper, every shaky vowel. Long mornings passed in the empty room, filled only with her singing. Sometimes fragile, sometimes full-bodied, sometimes trembling, sometimes breaking free like a river bursting its bank. In the evenings back home, Alyssa didn't rest. She opened online vocal tutorials, carefully jotting down techniques, exercises that most would abandon in boredom. Alyssa repeated hundreds of times without complaint. Her arms ached from riding her back, stiffened after hours sitting upright, but her eyes never once backed down. Her mother, walking past the doorway at times, would pause quietly, just watching her daughter work. She didn't say much, only smiled, a proud, glistening smile. Alyssa also began teaching herself about stage presence, how to stand, how to express emotion through her gaze, through her hands. She read about great singers, not just to copy technique, but to find strength. She taped quotes on her wall from Black artists and trailblazers who shattered expectations. No one can make you feel inferior without your consent. Eleanor Roosevelt. There were days when her voice cracked and broke apart, nights when she slumped over the desk, overwhelmed by a sense of futility. But each time she closed her eyes and remembered, standing on that stage beside her Harmony Wells, hearing applause not born of pity, but of genuine admiration. And then she rose again and sang. Alyssa no longer practiced to prove anything to those who doubted her. She practiced for herself, for her dream, for the voice that had saved her from the darkness. With each passing day, Alyssa's voice grew stronger. No longer the hesitant hum of a frightened girl in a wheelchair, but the steady, clear voice of a soul ready to meet the world. And though the road ahead stretched far and uncertain, Alyssa knew one thing for sure. She was moving closer, closer than ever to the dream she had whispered to herself for years. One Saturday morning, as Alyssa was practicing her vocal scales like usual, her mother suddenly entered the room, her eyes gleaming with excitement, holding an envelope in her hand. "You have a letter," she said, her voice trembling with both happiness and anticipation. Alyssa took the envelope, her heart pounding, when she spotted the familiar logo printed in the corner, Harmony Wells's artist management company. The letter invited Alyssa to a special audition reserved for young talents personally recommended by Harmony Wells. The event would bring together music producers, stage directors, and some of the most influential figures in the entertainment industry. Alyssa sat frozen, her eyes locked onto the neatly printed black ink. It wasn't just an opportunity. It was the first door leading to the dream she had only dared to whisper about in the lonely darkness of nights past. At the bottom of the letter, a handwritten note from Harmony Wells. "Alyssa, you deserve this chance. Don't be afraid to step forward. You are not walking alone, Harmony." Reading those words, tears welled up and streamed down Alyssa's face. Not tears of pain or humiliation, but tears of hope, of boundless gratitude for someone who had seen her, believed in her, when the whole world had turned away. In the days that followed, Alyssa threw herself into preparation with a fire she had never known before. She carefully selected her song, practiced each phrase, each breath with meticulous care. She rehearsed how to wheel onto the stage, how to introduce herself, how to bow with grace before the audience. She imagined the glaring stage lights blinding her eyes. She imagined the stern faces sitting in the judges' row. And she imagined herself singing, not to be accepted, not to seek approval, but to reveal the full truth of who she was. As the audition day crept closer, Alyssa felt a shift within her. She was no longer the trembling girl lost under waves of laughter. She had become a silent warrior, ready to sing, not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever been crushed, simply for being different. Holding the invitation ticket tightly in her hand, Alyssa gazed out the window, where the early morning sunlight bathed the worn rooftops in a golden hue. A small smile played on her lips. The road ahead was still long and full of obstacles, but this time she would walk it on her own voice, her own strength, never again bowing her head for anyone. The day of the official audition arrived. The sky was overcast, but inside Alyssa, everything blazed brighter than ever. Her mother carefully wheeled her out of their old car, pressed a light kiss on Alyssa's forehead, and whispered, "Do your best, sweetheart." Alyssa nodded, a gentle smile blooming across her face. The audition venue was inside a grand building, far more luxurious than anywhere Alyssa had ever set foot in. Inside, dozens of contestants were waiting, dressed to perfection, their faces taut with tension, yet burning with determination. Several curious glances followed Alyssa as she rolled her wheelchair through the room. A small girl, a young black woman, sitting in a wheelchair, amidst a crowd brimming with polished confidence and glittering ambition. Alyssa wore a simple sky blue dress, her hair pulled back neatly, her face lightly made up. She knew she was different, but she also knew that difference was her strength. When her name was called, Alyssa took a deep breath, wheeled herself onto the stage. Under the brilliant stage lights, the panel of judges became sharply visible. Stern of focus but not hostile, Alyssa stopped at center stage, adjusted the microphone to her height, and introduced herself with a steady voice. "My name is Alyssa Brown. I will be singing Rise." The music began, and then she sang. No more trembling, no more hesitation. From the very first note, Alyssa filled the room with a voice that was clear, powerful, and breathtaking. Each lyric cut clean through the heavy air, seeping into the skin and hearts of every listener. She wasn't singing from her throat. She was singing from a soul that had endured, battled, and never given up hope. When the final note faded, the room held its breath for a brief, weightless moment. Then applause broke out. Not thunderous, but steady, sincere. One of the judges, a black woman in her 40s, smiled widely and nodded in heartfelt approval. Alyssa bowed her head in thanks, wheeling herself off stage, her heart racing with exhilaration. No matter the outcome, she knew she had already won. She had stood tall. She had sung. She had shown the world who she truly was, Outside the hall, as her mother enveloped her in a warm, trembling embrace, Alyssa understood the road ahead would still be long, still filled with obstacles, but she had begun, and nothing could stop her now. Alyssa was accepted into a short-term training program for young talents. When she received the news, she nearly burst with joy, but that joy quickly gave way to a harsh reality. The music industry was far more brutal than she had imagined. From the very first training session, Alyssa could feel the difference. The other contestants, almost all beautiful, confident, gliding effortlessly on high heels, seemed as if they were born for the stage. Meanwhile, Alyssa, with her worn wheelchair, felt utterly out of place among them. No one openly discriminated against her, but the quick glances, the whispered conversations behind her back, they were impossible to miss. "Not marketable," a young supervisor said bluntly after one of her practice performances. "Audiences might feel moved, but they don't pay for pity." The words struck Alyssa like a cold blade across her chest. She understood what they saw, not her voice but her wheelchair, her brown skin, her unhideable difference. In the following sessions, Alyssa began to feel invisible. She was often scheduled to rehearse last or had her performances trimmed because stage design constraints. They said any upbeat songs requiring choreography she was cut from immediately. Doesn't fit the show's style. A production manager explained gently, but Alyssa knew the real reason. Some days Alyssa sat alone in the corner of the rehearsal room, watching her peers laugh-shoot TikToks and practice as groups. She had once dreamed of moments like these, but now the gap between her and their world felt impossibly wide. Yet unlike before, Alyssa refused to crumble. She couldn't control how others looked at her, but she could control how she saw herself. She began to privately train the skills she could master, conveying deep emotion, refining vocal technique, communicating through her eyes and voice rather than dance moves. She chose songs that touched the heart, rather than flashy chart toppers. She knew she would never be the glittering girl spinning across the stage, but she also knew that her voice could make people cry, could silence a room, and Alyssa chose to believe in that. Day after day, amid skeptical looks and whispered doubts, Alyssa persisted, inching forward bit by bit. She did not seek to blend in. Instead, she quietly affirmed her worth, not by demanding pity, but by demonstrating true talent. The first months of the short-term training program passed slowly and heavily, but gradually Alyssa's persistence began to chip away at the wall of prejudice. During an internal showcase for music producers, Alyssa was assigned a solo performance simply because they were short on performers. She chose a haunting ballad, one that demanded refined technique and the ability to convey raw, genuine emotion. No one expected much from her. A black girl in a wheelchair without glamorous costumes or dazzling choreography. But when the music began, Alyssa did something no one had foreseen. Each note she sang struck directly at the hearts of the listeners. Without flashy movements, only through her eyes, her breath, and the tremor of pure emotion in her voice, Alyssa drew the entire room into rapt silence. By the time she reached the song's climax, even some of the veteran producers were quietly nodding in approval. A few fellow trainees who had once looked down on her now found themselves unable to look away. After the performance, a renowned music producer approached Alyssa. He didn't say much, only, "Your voice has soul. It makes people forget the wheelchair." And to Alyssa, that simple sentence was worth more than any round of applause. Small invitations began to trickle in. A few charity events, a handful of community concerts. The pay wasn't high and the stages were modest, but to Alyssa, every time she held a microphone, felt like another step closer to her dream. She began to build a small but loyal audience, people who genuinely loved her voice and her story. On social media, clips of Alyssa performing at local events began to circulate more and more. The comments no longer fixated on her wheelchair. Instead, they spoke of the emotions she evoked. Gradually, the name Alyssa Brown was no longer tied to the image of the disabled girl, but to phrases like "a voice that touches the soul," "a true inspiration," "the most beautiful voice I've ever heard." The road ahead remained long and full of obstacles, but Alyssa now knew one thing for certain: she no longer needed permission to be heard. Her talent and her resilience were making the world listen. That evening, Alyssa stood backstage at the city's largest theater, where she had been invited to perform at a charity gala raising funds for children with disabilities. The stage lights blazed brightly. Hundreds of audience members filled the seats, their expectant eyes turned toward the stage, Her name appeared on the large LED screen above, Alyssa Brown, a voice of inspiration. Alyssa's heart pounded against her ribcage. She gripped the microphone tightly, closing her eyes for a brief moment. Old memories surged forward like a tidal wave. The cold hallways of school, the mocking laughter, the carton of milk poured over her hair mid-song, the icy smell of milk, the blinding lights, the indifferent faces sneering down at her. All of it crashed back in a single rush. But Alyssa did not tremble. She smiled. She smiled for the little girl who had refused to give up. She smiled for the countless lonely nights spent practicing, for the silent tears wiped away in the dark, for the scars that had once tempted her to surrender. And above all, she smiled for this very moment to stand here, not as a token of pity, not as a sad story, but as a true artist. The host announced her name. Applause filled the hall. Alyssa pushed her wheelchair forward onto the stage, the spotlight flooding over her bright but warm. She no longer saw the wheelchair. She only saw a sea of faces waiting to hear her sing. As the opening notes played, Alyssa lifted the microphone and began to sing. Her voice soared not as a plea for acceptance, but as a fierce affirmation of her proud existence. Every note rose, touching each heart, lighting up every eye. When the final note faded, the theater seemed to hold its breath for one perfect second, then erupted into thunderous applause that rolled like a rising tide. Alyssa bowed, low gratitude shining in her tear-filled eyes, brighter than any spotlight. In that moment, Alyssa Brown knew she had won. Not just against prejudice, not just against those who once dismissed her, but most importantly against the fear that had once lived deep inside her own chest, and she knew this was only the beginning.